welcome to another episode of Paranormal, the New Normal. I'm your host, as always, Jeremy, here trying to make the world seem a little more normal. These days, that's hard to do, but tonight, are we going to accomplish that? Yeah, I think we may to some degree. But as always, I have a guest to help me do that. And my guest tonight is Jack LaFountain, author, blogger, and paranormal researcher. And you'll see why in a little bit, I guarantee you that. But first things first, how you doing tonight, Jack?
Oh, doing great. Glad to be here.
Glad we can get you on. I've been looking forward to this interview.
Yeah, me too.
But let me ask you the first question I ask everybody on this show. What got you into the paranormal?
Well, I think more than anything else, what got me into the paranormal, I really didn't understand it until I got older, was that uh, I was a reader from a very early age. And I found out later when I began writing, one of the things that writers want to do is they want the reader to suspend disbelief in whatever it is they're writing about and get into the story. And long before I ever knew about that, I was just very easy to fall right into the story, become a part of it with with the characters, and do that suspense of disbelief. So whatever the author was telling me, I was in there, I was with it. And a lot of the very first things that I could remember reading were Edgar Allan Poe's stories, and that kind of gothic horror just kind of became my normal reading, my normal books. That too, and then I also grew up on the Universal monsters,
Of
Dracula,
course.
Frankenstein, Wolfman, Creature from the Black Lagoon. Well, we're Universal, but Godzilla, the original Godzilla from that time. Um, I watched those, Saturday afternoon at the movies, watching all those Vincent Price does Edgar Allan Poe movies. I was very much into things that were paranormal. The paranormal's just things that science can't prove or disprove, and that's always just kind of really all my life been my normal, because those were the things that I was into. Those are the places my thoughts ran to. Even so today, I mean, I get into, when I'm writing a story, I'm into the story, into whatever paranormal's happening there. I tell people sometimes, well, I'm off to New Orleans. And really, when are you leaving? When are you going? Like, no, uh, in my mind, I'm off, and I'm actually, I'm there. I'm with the characters. I'm in the story, the paranormal workings of it. I love werewolves, so uh, six of my novels are where they're werewolves, or the Louisiana Rougarou are part of those stories, and that's kind of the way I grew up, and that's the way I still think.
Which is, in my opinion, the best way to read a book is to truly immerse yourself in it and feel like you're there.
Yeah,
Which is why I'm a huge Stephen King fan, because his books let you do that. You could literally picture the street that the character's on the way he describes it. So
he does. I read a lot of Stephen King, especially early, and early in his career too, and I always thought his characters were amazing.
yeah, they are. And the fact that he reuses them in different stories is just adds to it. He made multiverse a thing before it was ever a huge thing in the movie world. So I
Right,
I gotta always throw him props for that. But and
right,
yeah,
and that's one of the things. Not everything that he does I emulate, but that's one of the things I've tried to do in my stories, is have characters show up in different stories. Uh, not a lot of people that I know notice, but I pointed out to him in Stephen King's book. If you look in a lot of his books, there's a character named Dwight Fry
yep.
that continues through the books, and if you research it, Dwight Fry was Renfield in the original Dracula, or the 1931 Dracula. He was also Igor in Frankenstein. Um,
Hmm.
Very famous character actor, but yeah, his name shows up frequently, just as a side character in Stephen King's books.
I did know about that, and it's just one of those many like Easter eggs I found online over the years when I was researching Stephen King. But
Right. Yeah.
I love it. I mean, I love that Randall Flagg's in pretty much like a book every 5 years he writes. Like Randall Flagg's the villain. It's just like
Right. Yeah.
this
Yeah.
guy,
The Randall Flagg character. Yeah.
he's just pure evil in everything he's in. But we're gonna talk about werewolves in a minute. I can't wait for that discussion. But I of course first have to ask you:
Oh, yeah.
Have you had any paranormal experiences that made you want to write this type of stories?
I have. I actually haven't written the probably the thing that got me most involved in it. Although I did write it as a short story, anonymously rather than putting my name on it. But I'm on about my fourth career now, and the second one was as an ordained minister. And when I was working through the process of becoming ordained, I was assigned as a pastor to a small, not really a rural church, but not a big city church in South Central Oklahoma. And when I got there, the uh, the pastor that I was replacing kind of took me on a tour through the place, and um, the building was sort of a shotgun building. And as you walk from the sanctuary of the church, and as you went straight through there, then you went through a couple of classrooms or the pastor's office and into a large hall that they had on the back of the building that had a kitchen, and that's where they had dinners and things. And then on the other side of that was an apartment, and that's where the pastor lived. And just on the first walkthrough, as we went through um, the kitchen area, and we did a tour of the building, and my wife said to me, "Did you feel anything strange when we went through the kitchen?" And I said, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, I did." And um, eventually, we became pastors of the church, and we found that people were afraid to go through there, afraid to go through
Hmm.
that part of the building, and it seemed to get worse the longer that I was there. It got to the point where my wife and kids would not go into that room, and the like I said, the apartment that we lived in was connected to this room by a door, and actually the freezer that we used was out in this kitchen. So if you wanted something from the freezer, you had to walk the length of this room. And strangely enough, to get to the light switch, you had to walk across the room to the other side of the room to flip the light switch. My wife and kids would not go into that room by themselves. Uh, in one case, my oldest daughter, it was summertime, and she was actually in the church itself, playing on the piano, and she heard the heater kick on, and it got unbearably hot. Because Oklahoma summertimes, 100 degrees is not abnormal anyways. It was that kind of heat, and then the heater running full blast until and she was getting very very warm in there. But then what what finally got her out was one of the doors swung open by itself, and she was, "I'm out of here," and she never again never was going into any part of the building. I felt it some, and I often wondered why the pastor that was there before really did nothing, didn't do anything about it. Um, and then like I said, it got worse over time till and eventually I moved my coffee maker from out of that fellowship hall into my office, so I didn't have to walk through there. Not that I was really ever afraid. It was just a feeling, really a rather malicious feeling, that you were being watched, and whoever was watching you didn't like you. Um,
Hmm.
I happened to be in the church itself one day praying, and I just happened to look up, and through this door that opened when my daughter was talking, the door didn't open, but this thing floated right through the door, and it was sort of like a shadow, but there was more substance to it than a shadow. It was more three-dimensional, more like a mist, and very black. And it came towards me. Uh, and it was, just a very threatening presence.
Hmm.
And I basically rebuked it, commanded it to leave. When I did that, and I don't know where I got not being afraid, but I wasn't afraid at the moment. I actually felt very strong. But after I did that, I felt a breeze go by me, and the the back two doors, which was the main entrance to the church, those doors rattled like a car hit them on their hinges, and that was the end of it for the time. My wife said a couple of days later, said, it. She actually pinpointed me. Said, "Did that thing leave?" And that was in there, because she thought it was an entity, and I said, "Yeah." And it was the idea. It was kind of, well, I don't know that it did leave. Either that, or it wasn't the only thing there. And a couple of weeks later, sort of the same thing transpired with me. And uh, after the second time that this happened, everybody felt better. Uh, they would come and go in the church, back and forth through there. I did have a similar occurrence happen at a different church that I was pastoring. Um, I worked night shift as a nurse, and I pastored a church as well. And I've worked all night, and then I had some things I had to do at the church. I went to the church, and when I finished with that, I laid down in one of the pews and went to sleep. And I woke up feeling like somebody's staring at me. You get that feeling, and uh, looked up, and I didn't see anything, but I could sense the presence. It's almost like, you can, somebody's so close to you, you can feel their breath on you. That kind of feeling. And I jumped up and kind of followed around through the church, kind of tried to follow the feeling where it was going. Never was able to pin that down, but uh, those are of course, there, on the other end, I actually did have one experience, a positive experience. Um, I was at a point where I was very depressed. I happened to be out walking, and this fella came walking up beside me, and we just started talking as we were walking along. I had a couple of miles to go to get to where I wanted to be, and we were talking, and I just began to feel better. The depression began to lift. I began to, just have a positive outlook on everything. He's, he said, "Well, I've got to turn here and go that way." And he pointed to a building that was nearby. And so I, told him goodbye, and I looked away. And then I thought of something I wanted to say, and I looked back, and he was gone. And it was a couple of 100 yards in any direction to any kind of cover. He just vanished. Uh, was it an angel? I think so, but I couldn't swear to it. But uh, it was something not of this world.
Hmm. I mean, yeah, I could believe that. I mean, it's well, one, I'm still picturing the first story you told about the first church, where I'm picturing your wife getting out of that kitchen like Scooby Doo in a cartoon, but just feet in the air, whoosh, gone. But
Yeah,
because,
yeah,
but
it was.
I haunted churches are not uncommon, which it's understandable, of course, too, because
No, yeah, it isn't. Yeah, like I said, I've I've run into several instances, and then as a nurse as well.
oh god,
Never,
yeah,
of course, I never actually saw a ghost while I was working in the hospital, but do I believe there were some there? Absolutely. I was working in a hospital one night, and one of the nurses' aides that worked with me came screaming down the hall, She was terrified, and it's like the little boy is in that room, and I didn't know about it at the time, but they had a sort of a hospital legend that there was this little boy that had died in this room, and occasionally he would show up, and there was nobody, there was no patients in the room. It was supposed to be an empty room, and she walked into that room to get something, and there was that little boy. And I did go down and investigate. I didn't see anybody, but I did go check it out. I absolutely believe she saw something that terrified her.
Oh, I mean, hospitals are
Oh
full
yeah,
of spirits. I mean, it's a place where people that are not ready to die are dying constantly. So
they are.
of course, it's going to be full of spirits. I've
Uh,
talked to a lot of different people who have had NDE experiences while in the hospital, and the
right.
things they see while they're on the other side when they're having the experience, like in the hospital, can be ridiculous. I mean, it's almost like
Mhm.
that. It's almost like that Patrick Swayze movie Ghost, like the stuff that you see in hospitals.
Yes,
But
yes, very much. I was working a shift one night in a little rural hospital, and again, I didn't. They there. I knew about their resident ghost, who he was actually a doctor back in the 1950s, and this was around 2005 when I was there. But in the 50s, he was a doctor there, and he happened to get heavily contaminated with DDT or some kind of poison, and died in the emergency room there. And everybody swore he was still around. Um, they would see him in the halls now and then. I never did, but one night, one of the aides was complaining about a creepy feeling, and I went to make my rounds through the medical ward, and as I went through, I went up one side of the hall, and then I started back down the other. And the very first room I came to, the IV pump was off, and it wasn't supposed to be. It was supposed to be running. I adjusted it, turned it back on, went to the next room, same thing. All the way down that hall, every IV pump was off, and of course, when I got done doing that, I went back to the nurse's desk, and I was about ready to give somebody a piece of my mind. For what are you doing, turning off all my IV pumps? And of course, when I got there and mentioned that, it's like nobody did that. Nobody had been down the hall for a while, and nobody had turned them off. But something had turned them all off. Of course, the answer that I finally got from them was, well, it was Dr. Johnson. He does that occasionally.
hmm, that's that's creepy, almost in a way, because that's something that could really affect somebody if he does it to the
Yeah,
wrong
it is.
person.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And I've actually used Dr. Johnson in a few of my fictionalized stories. He has become part of uh, out of several stories. He's one of those characters that I'll carry around if I'm talking about a hospital. Uh,
Yeah.
I include Dr. Johnson in that.
Well, while we're talking about your books, why don't we jump over to them for a bit? Because I was reading like the short blurbs about your books on your website, and I
Right.
am truly fascinated with a lot of them now. But I want to talk about the Ed Landry series.
About the which one?
The Ed Landry series,
Ed Landry. Okay.
because I mean, as any listener of my show knows, I am a huge fan of dogmen.
Oh, okay.
That's my favorite cryptid in the world, and since you wrote a series about them, basically, I'm dying to hear like. Well, you said you love werewolves, which, as much as I don't like the word werewolves, dogmen and werewolves are basically the same concept, and there's
Right.
some differences in them, obviously, and people debate whether both exist or one exists or either exists. But what made you fall in love with the idea of werewolves?
I don't know. I've some people ask me if I love werewolves because I have anger issues. Well, I don't know. I don't know about that. But uh, the idea is, and or as I started writing the first Ed Landry book, I had did some research on what the Cajuns call the Rougarou,
Yes.
which is their their version of werewolf and just really got absolutely hooked in the idea. And I set out writing the book. I had all I had when I write a lot by the seat of my pants.
Yeah.
I don't outline or plot out stories. Uh, I'll have a little bit of inspiration, and I start writing it, and I'll get bogged down sometime, and I tell my editor, "Well, the characters aren't talking. When they, I need them to start talking, tell me what's going to happen next." But I had an idea for this one that I kind of, again, from personal experience, it was not the supernatural part of it, but um, I traveled a lot as a nurse, and I lived in an RV for a few years and did travel nursing. And I had this little dog, and one night she just went wild, barking at the door. Um, Nobody around, but the idea for the story was born in that. And all I had to start the story was there was a guy, he was getting ready to go to work, and his little dog runs to the door and having a barking fit like there's something out there, until he finally gets creeped out. And when he finally decides he's got to go to work, this is nonsense, he opens the door, the werewolf grabs him, or the rougarou grabs him. That's what I had to start the story, and I kind of did some research in that, and uh, finally got going with the story. And a lot of people ask me, well, how can you be a Christian and write these monster stories? And I said, easiest thing in the world. Uh, they're about the battle between good and evil.
Exactly. I mean,
The same thing I talk about all that. When I did that.
The Bible is full of monster stories. Like it's full of
it is, absolutely is. Um, and not only monsters, but creatures not of this world.
Yeah, I mean,
I was teaching a class on Revelation. Well, I still am, but a couple of weeks ago we talked about a scene where the only thing the Bible describes them as are living creatures, but they're not any living creatures that are here on Earth. But that's an interesting idea, and I told them it's easy as could be. You read, if you read Bayou Moon, which was the name of the first Moon book. Yes, there's a rougarou in the story, but the story's not really about the rougarou. The story is about the sheriff who has to deal with the rougarou, and he ultimately has to make a decision between what's his legal responsibility, his legal duty, and what's the right thing to do. And that's the essence of what the story's about. But it does revolve around the rougarou, killing people in town. There's a reason for it. And,
of course, I mean, but it's an interesting point of view to have for the book, and that's what made me want to read it, because I love any books that are about sheriffs, especially. I mean, what do you call it? Stephen King's The Dead Zone. Like
right.
the sheriff is one of the main people in that story, and like I love the idea of. Well, I like the idea that cops can be corrupt, that they can be the bad guy sometimes, and they try to blame it on monsters. But so I like that idea too. I don't know if that's where yours goes, but I'll find out eventually, because I do want to read those.
He kind of, and that's kind of what birthed the series. Is at the end of Bayou Moon, there's some decisions he had to make about the paranormal. Is it real? Which, of course, he was kind of left with the, well, I guess it is, because I've been dealing with it for, with this rougarou, and he continues to run into situations like that, where he's thrown into the, into the trouble that's going on. And there's always a decision about, do I get involved? Do I take up the fight? What do I do? There's some moral significance to it. But again, it's just that idea of good versus evil, and a lot of times talk about people being good. It's not that in the book the sheriff's a saint, by no means, uh, but uh, he's facing something that he's really not prepared for. It's just really an ordinary guy, and he's faced with these extraordinary circumstances, things he didn't necessarily believe were real uh, to begin with, and then he's got to battle his way through it.
Yeah, which makes, I mean, that makes for a compelling story right there. And it kind of, well, you tell me that you were a pastor for years, kind of makes the second book series make a lot more sense in my mind. The Man of God series, I believe it's called. Yeah, the Man of
What's
God
that?
series. It kind of
Man
makes
of God series.
the Man of God series make a lot more sense because you have the personal
Well,
experience for that.
yeah. Well, where the Man of God series came from, the very first book that I wrote, very first novel I wrote, um, is called Death Rides the Red River, and it's set in 1870s Texas, uh, and it's about a fellow that comes home from the war between the states, and while he was away at war, he saw uh, this small troop that was made up of werewolves. That and if he finds that both governments had weaponized werewolves to terrorize the other side, and
Hmm.
I actually wrote a short story about those two groups meeting. But anyways, he sees this werewolf during the war, and when he gets out, he goes to Texas, and he begins ranching. But his problems follow him. He can't run away from them, and the werewolf shows up there, and along with a couple of the werewolf fighters, and he ends up involved in the fight. But a friend of mine read that book, and she doesn't really like monsters. So she asked me, said, "Could you write a Western story that doesn't have a monster in it?" And
Hmm.
that's all right. I'll give it a try. And that's where the Man of God series came from. Uh, it has bad guys, but it doesn't have any supernatural necessarily bad guys.
Yeah, but I'm guessing it has possibly some otherworldly bad guys, in a way, kind of, since it's a Man of God.
Yeah, yeah. In a way, I mean, he has to face things. Most of the things, the troubles that he has to face, in the first two books, anyways, uh, have to do with himself, with his past. He was a gunslinger and a bank robber before uh, he became a frontier preacher, and he's got most of the first two books he had is dealing with his past, and reconciling that to his life at the time.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it kind of reminds me of what's it called? It was just on TV for like 3 or 4 years. I don't know. I forget what it's called. It's a Western sci-fi thing that AMC did. I can't remember what the heck it's called
Oh,
for
okay.
anything. Right? Preacher. It reminds me of Preacher in a way, kind of.
Okay. All right.
Like he has to face the otherworldly evils, but he also has to face his past and what he used to do before he was a preacher. So,
uh,
I mean, it kind of makes it relates
yeah,
in a way.
yeah, kind of lean that way. Yeah, going to there, but
And plus, who doesn't love a western? I mean, westerns are just classic good storytelling. They are. I grew
yeah,
up on.
yeah. I love westerns, and in fact, I've just finished writing one today that
Ooh,
that I'm is going to be out probably by March, but
hmm. Okay,
I
so before,
I wrote it specifically. I'm going to Deadwood, South Dakota, in
ah,
June for the Hickok weekend,
mm-hmm.
and gonna be part of a show with authors there, and so I kind of wrote this one in mind. It's called Dead Man's Hand. So
Interesting. But those are not all the books you wrote, because there is one book that I saw that. Well, actually, okay, I'm not okay. There's a couple more books you wrote that piqued my interest, but this is the one that really, as soon as I saw the cover and I saw the title, this one piqued my interest, and that was Tracks.
Yeah, you see
Because
my cup there. Whoops, if I can get it to
yes,
the picture. I spent several years in the Pacific Northwest and heard lots of stories. Um, I fictionalized them to a degree, but not really the encounters. I people told me about their encounters, and I included their encounters, but also made a story of it. Because while I like to listen to Bigfoot encounters, like to hear them, I tell people a lot of times it's it's rightfully so. They sound like court testimony. It's
yeah,
all about I was doing this, I saw this, this is what happened, which is what people who are telling their about their encounters, they want to do that. They want people to believe them. They want to stick to the facts. Tell people what happened. And in Tracks, I try I stick to the facts that they told me, but made those a part of a bigger story. Uh, there are four stories, one for each season of the year, and
hmm,
it begins with the summer, and the time periods shift back and forth. Or each story takes place in a different time period, I should say. The first story is called The Haunted Warrior, and it's about uh, a Native American fella coming back from World War One from France, and he's missing part of an arm, and he goes back to Washington State, and the only jobs are there for men are there's logging, there's mining, there's fishing, and he's wondering, how am I going to get along with one arm? How's
yeah,
it going to work? And anyways, some events happen to him. He does find a job, but when he finds a job, one of the people along his route uh, is carried away by a Bigfoot. But they have the Salish Indians in that area that they called it the Seatic,
yeah,
and kind of read up on their legend, and the story follows their legend in that they were known to kidnap women from villages, and he ends up being part of a party that goes to rescue this girl who's been carried away. But the story, like I said, centers around the Native American legend, but included in there are that happen to the people in the story are events that people told me actually happened to them, and I included them in the story. Uh, the the oddball, I guess, in that book is the third story, the winter story in that book is told from Bigfoot's point of view.
ooh,
Uh, and I went through in fact, I published a magazine article called "Becoming Bigfoot," because when I set out to write it, my thinking in writing is to be, you want to be as honest as possible. Whoever's getting into the story, they know it's fiction. Basically, I'm going to lie to you. I'm going to tell you this lie that's this, the story that's a lie. But in order to carry it off, I'm going to tell you as much truth as possible. So, I went into a lot about, I talked with a lot of Bigfoot researchers and asked them, tell me, how do you know that Bigfoot thinks? And, like I had some tell me, well, I looked in their eyes, and it's like looking, you look into a dog's eyes, you can tell that there's feeling, there's thinking going on. I was, okay, I've never been that close to Bigfoot to look into their eyes. I couldn't tell you about that. Again, it could be something else. I want some concrete proof. I want you to show me somehow that show me an instance of Bigfoot thinking. And I finally got a call, and said, okay, I've got your proof here. Here's a recorded instance where this farmhouse, a ranch house, was being visited by Bigfoot.
Mm-hmm.
And they had motion lights out. And over time, they noticed that the Bigfoot learned that it was their motion, and they got to a certain place that made the lights come on. They could tell they figured it out, because what they did was took and planted sticks in the ground, sort of telling themselves, if you pass this stick, the lights are going to come on. That's okay, definitely thinking there.
Anybody who's into Bigfoot at all knows that Bigfoot is a primate, from what most people think. And like us, primates obviously have reasoning to some degree, depending where they are in the evolutionary scale, but they have intelligence to some degree always. And they can figure out how to do a lot of things. So something like that is brilliant, though. Like, I never heard of a Bigfoot story like that, and that's pretty unique.
Really. I did get one other call, which kind of, again, fit in with trying to tell the story. Is I was chatting with a fellow on Facebook, said, can I call you? And I said, sure, call me. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And he was telling me about, he's a hunter, and he lives in the Blue Mountains, northeastern Oregon, southeastern Washington area. And he hunts. He said, where I hunt, you drive in as far as the roads go, and then you hike for at least a day to get to where I hunt at. There's nobody back there. And he said he was coming home from a hunting trip, and he got back to where he'd left his car, and he was packing the car up, and he heard somebody talking. And he speaks like 7 different languages, and they're from all the different spots around the world. And he said, I listened to it, and it wasn't a language that I knew, but I could tell from the rhythm and the beat of it, it was language. Although, like I said, the words or whatever didn't, there was nothing even close to any language that he knew, and it was going back and forth between 2 different spots. He said the only thing that it could be were Bigfoot communicating.
Yeah, it's been said that when they communicate, it's like a primordial speech, like from when men first came out of the cave. Like, that's how they spoke back then, almost, but maybe a little more advanced nowadays, but still nowhere near a language we would recognize. But
right,
or
and
even
go ahead.
Sorry, but it's also even been compared to like the way some Native American dialect went. Like, because a lot of Native Americans believed that they were just another hairy tribe that lived in the mountains.
Well, yeah, and that's the one I talked about, took place in near Puget Sound in Washington. That was part of their legend, that the Seatic could speak all the native languages. He understood them, he could speak them, and that they actually ended up communicating with them. But yeah, that was very much part of their legend in that. And the idea of language worked for me for the story, because I heard this first story. I said, okay, they think, but I'm going to tell a story, and basically a story or a speech is thinking out loud. So what does Bigfoot call things? What does he call a cow? What does he call a person? What does he call this? What does he call that? And, I said in the article that I wrote, I'm not as ambitious as Tolkien. I'm not coming up with a dictionary and a whole language. I wasn't going that far into it. but I did try and work out, what do they call things? And, like the name the name I came up for them that they called people, they called us the Hey, because we'd call back and forth to it, hey, do this, or hey, do that. So that was, that's what they called us.
Huh.
But the story is this Bigfoot male, he has a mate, he has a little one. It's the worst winter in 100 years, and it's all about what he has to do to get them through the winter.
Interesting. Like a Bigfoot survival story almost.
It was fun to write. It really was.
I can imagine. I mean, there's so much creativity you could put into that, trying to come up with but it sounds like you actually put the scientific thought into it, like how instead of just making something up, you actually put the scientific thought behind it to be like, what would be the logical way they would do this? Which
Right, yeah,
that's the kind of book I want to read. I don't want someone to just make up words, not to hate on Tolkien because I love Tolkien, but I mean, Lord of the Rings is an amazing world.
yeah,
But I mean, I mean, I don't blame you not wanting to make a dictionary either because God, it's the amount of words
yeah,
he made up for those
yeah.
books is ridiculous.
Oh yeah, the work that went into that is amazing. Like I said, I was only going to plan to do this one, and that was so I wasn't going to do that. But although I don't know, I've been open to stories to do that. When I wrote Death Rides the Red River, I only planned on doing the one, and like the editor said, no, we need another one. write another one. And so I, I wrote a second one that came out in December, I think November, December just came out, called Death Haunts the Red River, which picks up from that one.
Interesting.
But,
Which it's funny because I just did a special back in December, and then I saw one of your books that you wrote as well, and I was like, oh, he wrote a book on Krampusnacht.
right.
I had a guest on, Marissa Miller, who is a creepy Christmas expert. She, like everything from all over the world that's creepy Christmas, she knows about it to the nth degree. She does tours about it all the time around Christmas. It was a fun episode. Like Krampus is a very entertaining folklore from Europe. And when I saw you wrote that, I was like, ooh, he knows about Krampus. Now I'm interested. Now I'm even more interested.
Yeah, that one came out like September or October in time for Christmas, but it is all creepy Christmas stories, which I loved. I love to write creepy Christmas stories. One of the things that got me writing, where I was actually going to let people read it. I entered a writing contest. I don't even remember. It was maybe the 80s, but it was an international Christmas ghost story competition that was held by a group, and I don't think they're in business anymore, called Spine Tinglers in Northern Ireland.
Huh.
And I wrote a story for that, and I took third place in their competition that year. I thought I'll try again took second place the next year. They quit having contests before I could win, though, but it did get me going. Every year I tried to write a creepy Christmas story, and the one this year was Krampusnacht, which, and again, I did some of that crossing of characters. Ed Landry is the fellow that meets up with Krampus in the story.
Oh, nice, nice. And I mean, it's got to be interesting for you too as well, because Krampus has some religious significance too.
Right. Yes.
So that's got to be
which, yeah, and again, that going back, that also applies to the Rougarou. One of the differences between the Rougarou and the werewolf stories is that one of the ways to become a Rougarou is to break Lent for 7 years in a row.
Yes. Yeah, so, I actually just had a podcaster from the Southern Gothic podcast that grew up in New Orleans on earlier this week, and we were talking about how, like, when you go to the New Orleans Zoo, there's a big statue of a Rougarou like right in the entryway.
Yeah. So. Yes. Yeah. I've seen that one. Yeah. That's pretty interesting.
But yeah, I mean, it's, I mean, of course, because of how religion played a part in human history, that religion plays a part in every paranormal story to some degree. There's always a religious element to every creature, at least somewhat. Somewhat. I mean, the Jersey Devil was born of Satan. I mean,
Right. Yes.
it's just
Yeah.
the way it goes.
Yeah. We drove around just a cursory look for the Jersey Devil this last summer or October. Back in October, I was in New Jersey. Did find the Devil Tree though
Ah,
in New Jersey. The legend is if you try and cut down the tree, you'll have a either die or have some very tragic accident happen to you. Uh, but I did find that and went out there to take a look. I didn't try and cut it down though. I wasn't going to do that.
yeah. I mean, well, depending how big a tree it is, it could be just people having heart attacks trying to cut it down. I mean, that
It's a large tree, and it's been set on fire. You can tell their axes have been taken to it. I guess some people want to live dangerously.
apparently, which New Jersey's not the place to do that, and neither is Pennsylvania, from what I've been told, because those two states are full of different creatures. So
Oh yeah,
it's just,
absolutely.
I mean, which it amazed me almost because I found out from a paranormal investigator who works in Pennsylvania mainly that people have reported seeing dragons in the mines of Pennsylvania.
Oh really?
Which I mean, I guess in this world it's not out of the realm of belief for me at least. But then I think back and I'm like, well, I did listen to a podcast years ago called "Dragons in the Bible," and it actually talked about dragons being mentioned in the Bible. I think it was 8 or 9 times.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, and they go back in folklore to pre-Bible times even. So they had to exist at some point, I think, and they had to. Do they still exist? Possibly. I mean, I don't like to say anything's impossible, but I mean,
Well, yeah,
Jersey,
that's one thing, right? As a writer, I do is I play a game and I call it "What If," and so
exactly.
anything's possible. What if there's nobody out on the street today? Well, what if a shipload of killer cockroaches from outer space landed and they carried everybody away? That's just kind of the way I think about a lot of things. Like, what can I do with that?
Well, I mean, yeah, you have the effect. You just got to think of the cause. So
Right.
it makes sense. Like it's that backwards logic that works, and that's a good way to write stories because I mean, it's
Yeah.
just
That
like
and it's just,
Stephen King didn't have to explain to me first why Pennywise existed. He just had to scare the shit out of me with Pennywise and then explain how it existed at the end.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah, yeah. And that works. I mean, one of the groups of authors, I read the first chapter to Bayou Moon for when I was writing it to a group of authors. It's like, why did you get us to like the fellow's name is Delmer? Why did you get us to like Delmer and then kill him off? I said, well, it's a paranormal and it's a murder story, and if you're gonna have a murder story, somebody's got to die, right? To
and
get you into the story.
exactly, and if you like the character, even when they die, then that's going to pull you in more because you're going to want to know why the person died instead
Right.
of just it's just the opening death in a horror book, like which most horror books have opening deaths at some point, but it's
Yeah.
just, I mean, to give them a
And
reason to care, you got to give them a reason
right.
to care.
And that's one of the parts of the story is the sheriff Ed Landry. He's got to figure out why. Why did somebody kill this guy? He's basically almost a recluse. The only place he goes is home and work. Why did somebody kill him? Especially a monster. But anyway, uh, yeah, that was a good part of the story. One of the things they asked too is it seems strange that they like the character. It's like, but what happened to the dog? Because there's
Everybody, everybody loves a dog.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I had to put in what happened to the dog. But uh, in the story, he Ed Landry has to figure out why the fellow died, and that's and is and the reason why it's one of the I think things is different about Bayou Moon. The movies I watched about werewolves growing up, it's kind of that good and evil. Well, Lon Chaney's character in The Wolfman, is he a good guy or is he a bad guy? Well, he seems like a good guy. He's coming home to help his dad out, and uh, and then he goes to a girl's rescue. He gets bitten by a werewolf, and protecting her, and then he becomes a werewolf and he starts killing people, and he doesn't like the fact that he's killing people. He sees it as a curse. So did the good guy become the bad guy? It's kind of makes you think. And Landry has to figure out why this is happening, and the difference in Bayou Moon I wanted to make a little different from the Wolfman stories is that the fellow who is the Rougarou wanted to become a Rougarou. He became a Rougarou on purpose, and because he had a plan in mind. And I just like that idea and that carried over into Blood Moon. The same thing happens in Blood Moon. They've got a plan in mind. They became shapeshifters, but often took on wolf shape because they wanted to. They had an agenda they wanted to attend to. In Voodoo Moon, my Rougarou in there, she doesn't want to be a Rougarou. As the story starts, she's been scared almost to death by a Rougarou, and she doesn't want to be one, but she ends up being one.
Well, I mean, I see, if I had the chance to turn into a vampire werewolf, I can't say I would turn it down. I mean, to me, it just seems, one, you get to be so much more powerful. You get to be immortal. You get to be, if you're a vampire, I guess. I mean, werewolves are to some degree, depending what lore you go on. But It's just there's so many advantages. I mean, you don't have a social life, but I don't care about that. I'm fine with that. I don't have one now, really. I got kids. I'm used to that. But
yeah, there is that certain allure to that, that.
Yeah, I mean, especially the vampire thing. I mean, vampires are a whole nother story. Which, have you ever thought about writing vampires into your series?
I did actually. The last Ed Landry story is called Lover's Moon.
Oh.
Landry's love interest from Voodoo Moon becomes a vampire. And he's actually caught in a love triangle, and the two women, one is a vampire, the other is a Rougarou. And those, by the time I finished Voodoo Moon, everybody was like, "We're really concerned about Ed's love life. He never seems to get the girls." So, in Lover's Moon, there's two girls, and he's got to, work out his feelings and his survival too.
Interesting. I mean, kind of like a Twilight-esque love triangle there. But I mean, I'm sure it's done 10 times better than Twilight ever was done. So, because Twilight is trash. But
yeah,
and this is from someone who's read vampire and werewolf books for 30 years. So yeah. But so why don't you tell my audience where they can find you, where they can find all your books? Just promote yourself to the fullest.
Oh, you bet. You can find me on Amazon Author Central if you take a look. But my website is jacklafountainauthor.com. All the books are on there. I have a blog that I write that's on the website. Or you can find me at my publisher's website, and my publisher is House of Honor Books. So houseofhonorbooks.com. Not only find mine, you can find the other authors that that they publish. Most of them are not. They're more fantasy. Some are thrillers. We do have one that the author wrote that was a big fan of Twilight Zone. Her stories are very much like the Twilight Zone stories. So there are a lot of different things on there. or you can find me on Facebook.com/author Jack LaFountain.
Which I, of course, will put your website right in the description of this podcast because I do that for all my guests just because I want people to read your books because I definitely want to read some of these. I'm going to add them to my long list of books I have. I have piles of books around my house from people that have been on my show that they sold me on their books and I wanted to read them. But
I hear you. I've got a stack.
Between podcasting, kids, and work, it just doesn't have time for it even. But
exactly, yes.
And
that's one thing that's allowed me to write. I retired in 2019, early 2019. Yeah. So, yeah, that's kind of turned me loose to write.
Yeah. Plus, I got my own 2 monster dogs, mastiffs in the basement that keep me busy too. So.
Oh, right. Cool. I've had dogs, and they're part. Yeah, like I said, part of my story. If you pick up the book Tokens of Perdition, the very first story in there is called The Ghoul Next Door. And again, was inspired by one of my dogs. We were out for a walk and a usual place we walked, and he just refused. This was a 90-pound Malamute. And he tucked his tail and refused to walk down this trail for 3 days. And of course, my what if took over. Okay, what if this is what's down the trail?
I will say, if I'm in my backyard at night with the dogs, and all of a sudden one of them, my big girl starts barking at the woods, and I can't see anything, I start to get a little scared. But then if the little one, who's only 6-7 months old at this point, if he starts barking, that's when I'm like, oh, because he never barks at anything. So if he starts barking, like it's like in the house, dogs now, house now.
Well, that's what people told me about that one. I was researching Bigfoot at the time, and that's Bigfoot. Because I told them I called around, and I all around. We lived on the shores of a lake, and I called all around, searched all around. Anybody had heard of any bears in the area, any cougars around? Because both of those are there. And nobody had seen anything. Nobody else had had any problems with it. Somebody said, "You got a Bigfoot in the neighborhood," and I'm not. I wouldn't deny it. There were definitely a couple of Bigfoot sightings by a deputy sheriff from that county, just a few miles away from there.
I believe it. I mean, the Pacific Northwest is full of Bigfoot. I mean, that's like their home base. I mean, they're all over the world, but that's a part of the world that they're very enormous quantities in. Right. Unlike other parts of the world where it might just be one solo one traveling on its own, trying to find a new home or something. But I mean, we suppose we don't have Bigfoot right where I live. Down the road about 20 minutes in Leominster State Forest, maybe there's supposed to be Bigfoot there, but so could they travel 20 minutes by walking? Yeah, I'm sure. But we also have the bears, the fisher cats, the moose, and everything else in these woods. So you never know.
Yeah, there is.
It could be anything.
There is local legend here in North Alabama, where I'm at, near Huntsville, of a creature they call the White Thing. Some people think it's a white Bigfoot. Some people something else. They're not really sure what it is. They just call it the White Thing.
I mean, skunk apes are supposed to be white, and they're down south, so
yeah,
that would make sense. But I want to thank you for coming on, Jack. It's been a really fascinating hour. The hour flew by. I couldn't believe it when I looked up and I saw the time. I was like, oh my God. I'm like, I had just been so fascinated I wasn't even paying attention to the time, but it's perfect. It's going to be a great episode.
Had a great time.
Yeah, me too. And I can't wait for people to hear it. But to all my listeners, you know where you can find me. And I will be back in half a week with another episode for you. Until next time, thank you all for listening. Thank you all for watching. And Jack, thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thanks a lot for having me.
We'll definitely have you back on. Whenever your book's coming out, just hit me up. We'll have you back on. I'll gladly help promote you.
All right, great. We'll do it.
And sounds good. And have a good night, everybody.